This episode of The Old Man and the Three is presented by BMW. Don't settle for good when you can have the ultimate. BMW, the ultimate driving machine. This Road to the Finals bonus episode is presented by BMW, the ultimate driving machine. Tommy, we are finally here. It has been a long NBA season, an awesome NBA season. You think about all the different moments from the playoffs, from the regular season. They've all gotten us to this point, which is a Boston Celtics, Dallas Mavericks NBA Finals matchup. I want to talk the road to the finals for both of these teams. Which team do you want to start with?
I want to start with Dallas because this was a question I was thinking about earlier this morning. I was going to ask you, at what point in this season, and you've said to me off air, you've said to me in March or April, whatever, you're like, this team can go to the finals. But at what point specifically in the season were you like, oh, I actually think that this is a possibility? Yeah.
All right. So I'll tell you this. I remember a game we did in Miami. Watching them play that game in person confirmed everything I had felt in watching them in film, preparing for that game, and everything I had seen in watching them over the month of March. And that was, they have like a real identity built around an offense where they give the keys to their two stars. The role players don't have any sort of issue with touches, shots, whatever. It's like, we know our role, we're going to buy in. And then they had a really incredible defense. So I think when you talk about like, how do they get to this point? I mean, it obviously starts with the Kyrie Irving trade, right? It starts with that. And, you know, looking back at my own commentary, and I always own my mistakes, I always own when I'm wrong. You know, I had some concerns about the long-term fit with those two guys. I had concerns about their defense at the beginning of the season. I mean, I remember, you know, we called the first game of the regular season against the Spurs, and Cuban came up to me after the game, and he was like, "Hey, I heard you were talking about our defense and how good was Lively and stuff." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, again, I brought up the point of attack stuff, particularly against bigger wings, and I brought up the rim protection, and all of a sudden they draft Derek Lively, and there's no guarantee that a freshman coming out of Duke that's a late lottery pick can be this impactful and this important in a deep playoff run."
I was going to, this has been talked about a little bit.
Even before the trades. It's Kyrie, it's Derek Lively. Like, these things happened last year.
This has been talked about a little bit over the last couple of weeks, but like historical precedent for Lively. And it's going to be a thing that will probably be talked about a lot. You're going to be probably talking about it on Thursday, but just talk about a lot in terms of a 20-year-old big man going to the Western Conference Finals. And not only like looking comfortable and looking at home, but actually being as dominant as he's been and being a force on both sides of the ball.
Yeah. Again, the league in sort of that position has evolved so much. And I think in terms of what a lot of modern NBA centers are asked to do, which is screen, rim run, play out of the short roll. That's your offensive skill set. And then protect the rim, and at times be able to switch and guard on the perimeter. The expectation for a kid coming in to be able to do that in his rookie year, not just in the regular season, but in the playoffs, I think that's massive, right? It's a massive part of this. And, you know, the only thing that I can really think of for my own career was a different position. And that was Courtney Lee got inserted to the starting lineup in the regular season. And he ends up playing a huge role for us as a rookie, but he was an older player. Yeah. And he was a guard. And you think about the development of big guys and the age of Lively. It's huge that he has been able for an entire season to have this level of impact.
And we talked at the deadline. We did mention Gafford. We mentioned PJ. And we've talked about that a bunch since then. But you've played with Luka, you've known Kyrie since, you know, he was in college, but their level of like ability to seamlessly fit. I mean, Luka's one of the best passers in the NBA, may end up being one of the best passers of all time when it's all said and done, but like their ability to seamlessly fit into what these guys are doing, coming from two bad situations and being plopped onto this team, and it being like, I was looking at their schedule before we start taping. February 3rd, they're 26-23. They get smoked by Minnesota, Milwaukee back-to-back. And you're like, is this team going to make the playoffs in the West with how good the West is? Now you look where they are now. You're like, you can't just say it's the deadline and those guys, but that's a big part of it, is them adding those two guys. And so like people are giving Kidd credit as they should, but it feels like this is the entire organization being able to seamlessly, whether it's Derek Lively, whether it's Gafford, whether it's PJ, these role players, and having them fit right away. And they're not having be this crazy learning curve.
To get to this point in the season, you have to have a lot go right, and you can't have a lot go wrong. That's probably been true for every finals team in the history of the NBA. If something does go wrong, can you mitigate that with an acquisition, with an adjustment, with inserting someone else in the starting lineup, with a player taking on a larger role? We've seen that happen in the NBA, right? What has happened with Dallas in particular is a number of things that I think there were question marks around have become positives. There were question marks about Luka and Kyrie, not personality-wise. I didn't have that question mark. I had a question about them coexisting in the backcourt, right? Kyrie, to me, is you can say whatever you want about him as like a 1A, as like the guy and the teams he's been on and their success rate, but as a sidekick, he's like the ultimate sidekick. And you think about throughout his career, he won at a high level with LeBron. When he did play, when they were all healthy, him, James Harden, KD, won at an extremely high rate. Now, there were some injuries in that Milwaukee series, and the subsequent year there was trades. But when they were on the court together, like Kyrie is like the ultimate sidekick. He figures it out. And so that was probably my mistake at the time, is like, well, Kyrie's a really intelligent basketball player. Luka's a really intelligent basketball player. Kyrie has been in these situations before with LeBron, with James, with KD. Like, he's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Jason Kidd said something to me, and it goes back to the other things that have gone right, which is, you hit on Derek Jones Jr. As a minimum player. You trade for PJ Washington. You trade for Daniel Gafford. You hit in the draft. Josh Green continues to develop. Dante Exum in the regular season was fantastic. Became a world-class shooter after not being one in his first stint in the NBA. So you had all these things go right. The point I wanted to make, Jason Kidd told us in one of our pregame meetings during the LA Clippers series, we were asking about the fit on the court, off the court, of all the sort of additions and changeover. And he said, Luka likes calm. Luka doesn't like chaos. And we've put people around him that are just the same every day. We put people around him that are quiet and reserved, and in some ways you could argue are deferential to a degree.
Yeah.
Right. And so that, to me, it's, as much as it is about the fit on the court, it's also the fit off the court and personality-wise, where this group has really gelled.
Well, I think about that. I mean, we talked about this a little bit, Priscilla, last week. We've talked about with a number of players about the knowing your role. And I think for me, even like looking back at the impactful things that people have said on the show, I thought the first time Caruso came on and he talked about his experience, his experience with the Lakers in the championship run. And he was like, to paraphrase a little bit, he was basically like, my role here is like every team needs a guy to go take out the garbage. You know what I mean? My role here is to do exactly I'm not here to score 25 points a game. I'm not here to do this. I'm not here to have the ball in my hands. But my role here is to take out the garbage. And he's like, and I excelled at that. And it feels like the Mavs have a team that is now locked in on them understanding that about themselves. So like we'll have some of those guys on in the offseason, and I'm sure they can tell it to us themselves, but it's basically like, this is not a team where there's a ton of question marks about everyone's role is.
Real quick, I just want to say the Celtics obviously had the best record in the NBA, and you look at nearly any stretch of the regular season, they had the best record over that stretch. They had the best record by about, I think it ended up being 6 or 7 games over the number one team in the West. And if you look at from February 5th on, which was right around the deadline, the Celtics had the best regular season record from that stretch on. Not surprising, 26-6. The Mavericks had the second best record in the NBA at 24-9. There's obviously all that noise. But I think that's where, going back to my point about the identity, I think that's what really struck me as the identity around their defensive team. Think about that first round series where you've got size and length with PJ Washington, with Derek, like PJ Washington taking on really difficult matchups where 4 months ago he was playing for the Charlotte Hornets and not really playing meaningful basketball even in the regular season. And all of a sudden he's taking on 1A and 1B matchups on the defensive end and embracing that.
And shooting 50% from three.
And shooting the shit out of the ball, particularly from the corner. Like things have to go right.
Yeah.
And it's a credit to each individual. It's a credit to Nico Harrison. It's a credit to Jay Kidd. It's a credit to Luka and Kyrie. It's a credit to everybody. You can't get to this point in the season without a lot of stuff going right.
Where do you stand on Stan's comment about them being the best offensive backcourt ever?
Well, we were asked that today on the our media chat that we had. Doris and I had a Zoom this morning. And I've been consistent on this, whether you've listened or not. I think it's really hard to compare eras, and I think players should be celebrated for what they did in their era. Since day one, since the NBA 75 list came out, my very first fall of retirement.
You said the exact same thing every time, and people somehow
get. I'm shitting on every era, time. Which is fucking crazy. I merely point out factual statements, and nobody wants to listen because things get aggravated and hyperbolized. But anyways, I would say, in terms of offensive talent, I think it's safe to say there probably hasn't been a duo as gifted and as talented offensively as them. I think that's safe to say. You want to play this game where we're like, this guy in this era, he couldn't play, he could play. Like Luka and Kyrie, like any great player, particularly any great offensive player, would be great in any era. And they would play in any era, and you would say, oh my God, how skilled is this guy? How talented is this guy? That's true. And that's going to continue. In 30 years, there's going to be other players. And we're going to say, they could play in any era. They're that good. These guys are that good offensively. They both are, in some ways, I don't know that there's a historical comp as a primary ball handler for Luka outside of maybe those Harden years with the Rockets. And if there is, please tell me. But the way they play, because of the step back three, because of the ability to distribute, the ability to go nuclear and go for 50 every night, there's just hasn't been a lot of Lukas in NBA history. Then you factor in the fact that everybody talks about Kyrie as the most talented or the most skilled player ever, whatever it is. I'm not willing to go that far because I think skill is very subjective. But in terms of just raw offensive talent and the ability to wow you with his moves and his handle and his finishes and his shot making, yeah, I think Stan has a valid argument. I don't want to do the comparison thing between eras.
Well, when you look at numbers, I mean, they're second in combined points, they're second in combined points generated, they're third in offensive box plus minus. They combined for 59 points a game in the Western Conference Finals. And the guys that were first, to your point, were James and Westbrook, but they didn't have the playoff success. And so I think, to Stan's point as well, it's one thing to do that during the regular season. It's another thing to take a team to the finals doing that. And I think these points can be made in real time as the season starts to develop.
I also like that in terms of the fit, they have sort of figured out when to relinquish and when to control. And sometimes, with let's say a bench heavy lineup, like it's on Kyrie, right? But there are times when Luka will get the ball in the backcourt and just throw it ahead to Kyrie and allow him to just go operate, right? And he'll play off the ball. There's certainly times end game where they feel each other out. All right, who's got the matchup? Who's got the coverage where we can generate a good shot? Who's got it going? Like, there doesn't seem to be like a tug of war between them at any point in time where it's like your turn, my turn. No, it's my turn. No, it's your turn. Like it feels very natural the way this on-court relationship has progressed in terms of who has control and who is relinquishing a little bit of that control.
I have a trivia question for you. Who was the last?
John Koncak.
Almost. Who was the last scoring champ to win a title?
The last scoring champ to win a title. Huh. Huh. Is it in the last 10 years?
Nope.
Man. Was it Jordan?
Close.
Who was it?
Shaq in 99.
Yeah.
Shaq in 99, Jordan 98.
Yeah.
So this year would be.
Yeah. It could be the first for Luka. And it's interesting to he obviously from start to finish had just a phenomenal regular season, top 3 in MVP voting, had a strong argument like Shea did and like Jokic did for the MVP of the regular season. And you think back early, especially in this finals run, the Clippers series, where he's clearly banged up. He's clearly, his knee was bothering him, his shin, ankle, whatever. He's got the kinesio tape wrapped all over his body. And there were just points in time in that Clippers series where Kyrie just said, okay, I've got to just be the guy here. I've got to be the guy. And so some of the shooting numbers for Luka weren't great early on. And he has like a guy who can just be him for stretches of a game.
Yeah.
What a luxury to have as a teammate, but also as a team. We're going to do a little preview because we've done a bunch of these discussions already over the last week. Do a little preview at the end. I do think what's interesting as it relates to Kyrie and just sort of his evolution during these playoffs, where was really looking to take a backseat early on in games in that Clippers series. And then at times the volume was down in that Oklahoma City series, but the playmaking went up. There were times in the Minnesota series where he just decided, I've got to get it going early, particularly in game 1. And then there were times where he just took over down the stretch of the fourth quarter. I want to just point out how ridiculously hard that is as a basketball player. To be able to oscillate between scoring, aggression, playmaking throughout a game, throughout a series. We know that Luka's going to be the highest usage player on this team. But Kyrie figuring out in real time in a playoff series when it is that he's got to put his foot on the gas and when he's got to take his foot off the gas. I think it's really a fascinating thing that he's been able to do.
Besides just the obvious talent factor, some of that has to just be experience too, right?
Yeah. I think that's where you lean on the experiences of playing with a LeBron or playing with a Kevin and a James.
Yeah.
Even that year in Boston where it felt a little clunky with Jaylen and Jayson coming off that Eastern Conference Finals Game 7. That year, that I think it was 18-19. Yeah, 18-19, where that year he probably learned a lot. He probably learned a lot from that year.
Here's my Boston question. As we switch to that, 76-20 on the year. They were your and most people's favorites coming out of the East heading into the season, and literally nothing happened during the season to shake that in any capacity. Much has been talked about the teams they played in the playoffs and the injuries and blah, 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 and all that. You can't help any of that. But now they're in this spot. Is there anything in the back of your mind that feels like can shake them off this just basically like march that they've been on? Because they haven't had it since October.
I think Luka and Kyrie can, just as players. This Dallas defense is real. The only approximation of some of the spacing issues that Boston presents to this defense were found in that Oklahoma City series and at times in the Minnesota series when Gobert was off the floor. But then defensively, the Wolves were just worse with Gobert off the floor. I don't think you necessarily have that with Boston because of Horford, because of KP, their shooting, their spacing. There's just, I would imagine with a healthy KP, the rotation goes to 8 people. You don't know how much Hauser and Pritchard are going to play night to night, but the rotation goes to 8 people, and there's a shooter at every position at all times. Certainly, if they have an off-shooting game, an off-shooting series, and Luka's able to control the game and score efficiently, and Dallas makes some corner threes, and Luka hits 5-step back, there's a lot that could go wrong still, and that's where I believe Dallas is that good of a team to come out of the Western Conference. Think about this. we talked for a large stretch of the season about the Clippers potentially being the best team in the West. They took care of them. Oklahoma City was the number 1 seed in the West. They took care of them. And they present a bunch of matchup problems too.
Yep.
And they had a top defense, a top offense. Then you go to Minnesota, who knocked off the defending champs, right? And going into that series, Minnesota, man, their defense, they're unbeatable, right? This is where I think a good sort of marker for me for this series is the way that Luka and Kyrie have been able to close games consistently versus Boston, where in the past it hasn't felt that way. But in these playoffs, they've been phenomenal in the clutch. And they were phenomenal in that Indy series.
Yeah.
So there's a level of confidence late game right now with Boston, and there's a level of confidence late game with Dallas that I think is really important.
This is a sort of a broad, it's a question from your personal experience rather than drawing this to this Boston team in particular, because I hate when people put hypotheticals about teams that are not based in anything. But with all the success that they've had, when you've been on teams at any point in your life that have been this good and this favored, and you get, like, say they get punched in the mouth in game 1 on Thursday, they go up and they just lose by 25, and you're like, oh shit, this is not a team where their best player is hurt. Like, this is a team where the other team has the best player in the series. Yeah. Like, is there anything that can throw you off? Not that it's going to cost them the series, but it might take them a few days to sort of recover from.
I think it's a valid question, Tommy. I would say where I have confidence that Boston will be able to sort of recover from something like that. And look, there's a good chance they are down sometime in this series. That's how good Dallas is. Yeah. That's how good Dallas is. Maybe not. Maybe Boston wins in 5 games. I don't know. I don't do predictions, but there's a good chance. It's not without the realm of possibility that they're down in this series. And this is where I think Joe Mazzulla comes into play. Because if you talk to him and you talk about sort of dealing with these stressful moments, like, his messaging to this team throughout has been so consistent. He's built up a group mentality that I think is really important. And in fact, one of the things that he said to us multiple times is he talks about this idea of the pressure and the chatter and the expectations weighing on this group because of their past success, but not the ultimate success, right? The finals loss in 22, the conference finals game 7 loss last year to Miami. He talks about that stuff, and he says, if we win this year, I tell the guys this all the time, if we win this year, that's not going to go away.
Yeah.
Like, we talked about this last year with Jokic. It's like, I hope, in some ways I hope, and I feel this way about Embiid too. Sometimes with certain players and certain teams, part of me just is like, if they win, the conversation's going to stop. Guess what? It didn't stop with Jokic.
No.
It didn't stop with Jokic.
No.
There was still
the goalposts always move.
Yeah, the goalposts always move. So it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
So I think for this group, it's like they have preached, living in the moment, embracing this moment right now all season long. And so I don't think that's gonna, like, if Dallas comes out and they win game 1 on the road, that's going to be a normal deterrent like any other series for any other team. Versus me thinking, Boston's not going to recover from that.
Yeah. I do wonder if this is also going to be, if this partially will be where we'll see the impact of Drew, besides the obvious on the court impact. Just someone who has done this and won before.
Yeah.
And who can kind of settle the, forces a little bit, because they haven't. I mean, I'm thinking about the last time Boston was in the finals in that Warrior series, Steph, when they were down 2-1, what he did. And, Steph is Steph. He's his own thing. But at the same point, it's like, that's a guy that's like, we're not losing.
Right.
Just and it's one of the things that makes the series so fascinating is Boston clearly has multiple guys who can do that.
Yeah.
So now let's see if they have the ability to do it.
It's interesting when I think about that concept of someone putting their imprint on the game to the point where you say, we're not losing. We always think of a guy making shots. And with Steph, if we go down the list of all his superpowers, and he has a lot of them, his superpower is making shots. Like, well, let's start with that superpower. What I saw in the Indiana series, especially in games 3 and 4, and to a degree in game one as well with Jaylen at the end, is guys having an impact on the game that doesn't involve making shots. Derek White and Drew in that game 3, where they're on the ropes, they're getting their ass kicked all game, and they didn't play particularly well for 2.5 quarters. Towards the end of that third quarter, it was like Derek White, weak side block, Drew Holiday, offensive rebound. That's where I think if you're a Boston Celtics fan, you can say it doesn't have to just come down to Tatum's got to go make jump shots.
Yeah.
Right. And in the same way with Dallas, like Luka and Kyrie are going to score. PJ Washington can impact a game. Daniel Gafford can impact a game. This is why these teams are in the NBA Finals. And, particularly with Derek and Drew, I think there's a level of like, I can just go make 9 basketball plays over the next quarter and a half. And maybe there's a 3 involved. Maybe there's a steal to a fast break layup. Maybe there's Drew big bodying somebody for an and one like he did in Indiana. Maybe there's that. Yeah. But there's also a deflection.
Yeah.
There's also picking someone up in full court and they don't get into their shot clock, or they don't get into their offense until 8 on the shot clock and they get a shot clock violation. Like those 2 guys make high-level winning basketball plays beyond just making shots.
Yeah. And what's so scary about this team, and you've talked about Porzingis all year, is the cheat code.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been talking this week about how Lively's now played in more playoff games than him. But you're also just like, this is a dude who can just take over a series.
Yeah.
People talk about it. He was fifth best rim defender in the league this year. But like offensively, if he goes on a heater,
yeah,
like I don't know what you're going to do with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I've called enough Celtics games against good teams this year where he's making 27-foot threes. He's posting up smaller defenders in the foul line area, shooting right over the top. He's catching lobs. He's blocking shots at the rim. I'll say it again. He's the X factor. Let's talk real briefly about just, because this has all been documented, but let's talk about real briefly because I want to make a point on the Celtics, how they got here. And we touched on the past playoff performances. Jaylen Brown has been in 6 conference finals in 8 years. Jayson Tatum, 5 conference finals in 7 years. So they've been in 5 conference finals, 1 NBA finals together. And there's that expectation because they've been there and they haven't been able to get over the hump. And that's something that you eventually just got to conquer. But when you look at this team, getting Kristaps Porzingis for Marcus Smart and some picks, getting Drew Holiday in the trade, in some ways the Marcus Smart leaving kind of made Derek White play a more substantial role, him having a career year. If you talk to any of their guys, Kristaps on the podcast back in December, certainly all the pregame interviews we do, there's a common theme. And I think we've had nearly everybody in a pregame interview, and certainly we've had a bunch of these guys on the podcast. The common theme is always, and sometimes it's lip service. I don't think it's lip service in this case. Look, we're all willing to do whatever it takes to win. Like, if you think about everything that has happened in these guys' career, it's all built to this moment. And so Kristaps in particular, early in the season, I don't give a damn who gets the shot. This is about winning a championship. Al Horford, beginning of the season, we got 6 starters. I'm the guy that's going to come off the bench. Don't worry about me. I just want to win. Everybody always says, I just want to win. They don't say, I just want to win on my terms, which is how most people think. These guys have lived it out. They've lived and breathed it since training camp.
Yeah.
They want to win, and they will do whatever it takes to win. And it's not on their terms.
Yeah.
It's not. They've all taken a substantially less role, minus Derek White, and that was sort of just the nature of the team dynamic. They've all taken a substantially less role, shots, usage, all of that stuff, play calls, like they've all taken, and they've done it so that the group can win.
Jaylen Brown, we talked about it all year, but like how good he's been defensively. That's a guy in a different situation. It's maybe an all-NBA player, with more usage. But like,
I voted him all-NBA.
So
I don't know. I would like to know historically. We're doing historical comps here. How many 64-win teams got one guy on an all-NBA team? Zach Lowe and I, on this week's Old Man of the Three, we do a full series preview. We touch on, I would say, nearly everything. If we miss something, We maybe missed Peyton Pritchard going on a 6-minute heater and hitting 4 threes, but we touched,
which is going to happen now.
Which now that we didn't talk about that, it's going to happen. I would say big picture in terms of a preview for this series, we have touched on a lot of the things. Luka and Kyrie scoring efficiently, both teams manufacturing good threes and shooting well. I think rim protection for both teams will be huge. And like we always say, I think the Alfreds, and we've touched on a number of them, the Alfreds in this series will be big. All right, Tommy, we have discussed what these teams need to do to be the best and give their team the best chance of winning. So if you wouldn't settle for just good for your favorite basketball team, why settle for it in your car? With BMW, you're not getting good, you're getting the ultimate. You don't have to choose between speed and luxury. You can have both. Don't settle for good when you can have the ultimate. BMW, the ultimate driving machine.